So after I took the communication style quiz, question number one is, do I agree or disagree with the results? I agree. Um, it labeled me as a supporter, someone who cares more for others and puts other people's needs before their own and does things for not the glory of doing it, but my personal gains. And that's pretty spot on, actually. I generally put others first and don't really think about myself much, honestly. I do things for other people and always make sure their needs are met. So I definitely agree with that. Considering my interactions with others, honestly, I kind of try to mimic their mannerisms and read them really well. With my upbringing, it really helps play into reading people's emotions, and being able to kind of discern when somebody's upset. So basically I can figure out what kind of mood you're in, how to approach you, if to approach you, and then what way to talk to you if I'm going to communicate with you, simply within a few moments of talking. And that comes a lot with being raised in the kind of household I was raised in. And, if I'm face to face, I can definitely gauge that better. Obviously, because I can hear voice tone, I can read body language, I can pick up if somebody's standing a certain way. Whereas if I'm doing it virtually, through social media, like Facebook or email or text, especially text, it's really difficult to gauge someone's not, I shouldn't say mental well-being, but to be able to gauge somebody's emotions and what they're thinking and how they're responding and reacting. Because for the instance, the word K, just the letter K, a lot of people take that as a short abbreviated OK, and an upset K, K, or it could be K. There's a lot of really gray area when texting. So unless you know the person extraordinarily well and you know their mannerisms, it's really difficult to pinpoint okay, something's wrong, or she's upset, or he's mad, or she's sad, or whatever it is. And then the third question is, to what extent do I prioritize mediated communication when I'm face-to-face encounters with others? So it really depends on the person. With my spouse, I don't really mediate the conversation with him. It's more go with the flow. We've been married for a decade, so I know his mannerisms, and I know how he thinks and how he works. But if I'm talking to somebody that either I don't know or I don't feel comfortable with, or that may not feel comfortable with me, I definitely try to gauge that conversation and mediate it as best as possible, to kind of I wouldn't really say go with whatever they're going with, but make them feel more comfortable, or at least make myself more agreeable so they don't feel displaced, if that makes sense. I definitely don't like confrontation. I don't like to get in arguments or fights. I pretty much, unless it comes to something like my kids, I pretty much don't care how what I have to agree to, or being agreeable to somebody if it kind of moves the conversation, especially if it's uncomfortable. But if it comes to my kids, obviously that's a totally different ball game. And then question 4 was, how would my important relationships change if I created a device-free zone and times? Well, considering I live here in Alaska and the majority of my family lives in Indiana, it would pretty much ruin all of those relationships. I wouldn't be able to communicate with them on a day-to-day basis, so it would be one of those things. But if we're strictly talking about the people here that live around me, it would create a lot of it would get rid of a lot of uncertainty about things. Like I would be able to gauge their conversation skills and all of the other things. It would open a lot more. It would open the door for a lot more conversation, like person to person conversation, or it would take away some person to person conversations. One thing that is really interesting with this quiz is the fact that, and I learned this having ADHD, that it's as someone who has ADHD and found out as an adult and not as a child, and also being melded from my upbringing and some of the traumatic stuff that happened, and how I was raised with the parents I was raised with, gauging somebody's reaction just by like the sound of their footsteps or their body language is not only an ADHD trait, but it's also a trauma trait, which is really interesting. And one really cool thing about an ADHD trait, which a lot of people don't know, which really goes into this whole communication style, is that mimicking accents and the way people talk is something that a lot of people with attention deficit hyperactive disorder do. And it's to make that person feel more comfortable. So if I'm on the phone with my grandma, who is from Missouri, she has a little bit of a country twang to her voice. Like she says wash instead of wash. And so once I'm done talking to her, or my aunt who still lives in Missouri, who still is very thick, rooted in that like Missourian accent, I will mimic their voice for quite a long period of time, actually. And I do the same thing with anybody from a different like country who has like Australian, English style voices. I try and mimic it, and I don't know that I'm doing it until after I do it. So, and once I figure out that I'm doing it, I've committed. And if I stop doing it, then I obviously look like a jerk. But I kind of warn people, I'm like, if I start mimicking your accent, it's not to make fun of you. It's simply to make you feel more comfortable and more at home. But yeah, I think the communication quiz is pretty spot on for me. So